Okay. Oh, maybe I'll ding that. Can I?
Louder. There we go.
That's much better. Yeah.
Need one of those at home.
Okay. Well, thanks for staying. Sorry we didn't get to all the content of the presentation. There's just too much to say. It's a big, swirling subject. But I guess maybe we'll start with
Any residual questions, I think,
yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah.
is there, in this smaller group, right, not everyone is watching, so how comfortable do you feel with the aesthetic now? Have you learned something? Do you feel a little more comfortable with it? Okay, that's good to hear. Here's a question right here.
I'm curious as to your perspective, if there is something more that you would add if you had a few more minutes, without us asking a particular question, but something that might help us in general that
About
you
the
wish you could have
aesthetic?
shared. Yeah,
about-
and particularly in terms of how it relates to dying.
All right, well, I'll start, and then I'll say something about the aesthetic, then you can say something about, in care, how that's going to apply to care.
Okay.
One thing, a lot of stuff got cut, as you can imagine. There are two of us. We've got a short time. So one of the things that got cut that really should have been included was we really just wanted to focus on one thing, and that was that thing about enlivenment, about how the aesthetic has the power to animate and to quicken us. But there's another important thing that I had to cut out, and that was how the aesthetic is really focused on the experience of things for what they are in themselves. And I didn't really get to say anything about that. That's, we go about our daily lives, and almost everything that we do and everyone we interact with is a means to some other end, right? There are very few things where your attention, your experience, everything stops and is focused on something for its own sake. We're always trying to think about how is this going to benefit me? How can I appropriate this and use it for something else that's going to lead to something else? It's this endless chain of means and ends. And the aesthetic is what stops that. You step outside of it in that moment. And that's very important. And it was a little off topic from what we were trying to say here, but if we were going for a full hour, that definitely would have been part of it.
Yeah, that's really key, and sort of building on that point is just re-highlighting Dewey's point about the immediacy, anything that heightens the sense of immediate living, that immediacy. So I find that really compelling, besides the being for its own sake, the fact that it can be instantaneous. It's not necessarily something you learn. You can cultivate your aesthetic sensibilities, but they are innate, they're inherent. They're probably how we're pre-verbally navigating the world. So this temporal component, it seems really critical to me, the immediacy of it. So if someone is coming to the end of their life and time is running short, the clock's winding down, tick-tock, tick-tock, that can be halting and arresting. Just when your time is most precious, you can freeze, right? So the aesthetic dimension seems a way to cut through that. So even if you've got a couple hours to live, this may be a way to eke out some sense of transcendence, some sense of belonging in the world, something good. And I would just say, I think to sort of also re-highlight the absolute accessibility of this and the subjective sense of it. So some people may want music playing, some people maybe want silence. Some people may want darkness, some people may want a crowd around. It's all over the place, but this is what you get to tell us. And this almost has a place in advanced care planning, sort of setting the stage for your death to some degree.
How many people do you find are able to set that stage and willing to setting that stage as to what they want?
On the aesthetic plane?
Yes.
Yeah, there's degrees, right? Some, at Zen Hospice Project, where Diane and I work together, you'll see people who, and our average length of stay is, 2 weeks, so they're not there for very long, but still they will, move in, and the room becomes their own, becomes their new home, and they will populate it with perhaps artwork or photographs or something of meaning, or a quilt of something that's appeals to their senses. So that happens a lot. Someone really designing and orchestrating their death scene, that's a much rarer phenomenon. Perhaps it'll become less rare as we actually, as a society, take on the idea of advanced planning more robustly. besides just do you want CPR or not, you might sort of really welcome design into the mix and really think through the whole stage. So I've heard people who I've been with dying in a hospital rue the fact that they're dying in an ugly environment. A few artists that I've been able to help take care of have been almost angry at that. So I've almost more seen it in the negative, the lacking.
Here's one here.
I think similarly to what we're discussing now, I'd love to pull Mitchell's question in again and explore that a bit more about the body around death. And specifically what I've been thinking about lately is organ donation, a decision that often we make 16, 17, 18 years old in the DMV, deprived of aesthetics, and after standing in line for an hour. So I'm just wondering if we could maybe have a discussion more about what Mitchell was mentioning, the body and the whole process of dying.
Well, so it's for me, just reflecting together here. I mean, for me, when I've been around death and being with the body before and after the death moment, before that medical, legal definition of death happens, I am struck mostly by the sense that the life really is gone, that the body, almost in an instant, becomes this clearly a shell. Like if I've stumbled upon a molten snakeskin or something, it's an interesting object, but it is no longer what it once was. Something has exited that body. So I've been more around that. I've seen that sort of profound inflection point. And it's hard for me to answer Mitchell's question without getting into belief systems. And I don't know if you'd have any different reflections from a different point of view, Justin.
Well, what occurred to me was, I know in the Catholic tradition, like even after the body's been dead for a while, the priest will still come and give the last rites, whispers in the ear of I remember as a child asking, why would they even do that? And they say because hearing is the last thing to go. This has, I guess, been a long belief. And that held some significance, that the person has died but may still be able to hear, or at least those of us who are still living know that those last rites were given, because that's something that's required. It's on the list of things that Catholics have to have done. So even if they are legally and medically not still here, those will be delivered, just whispered into the ear. So I just thought of that little aesthetic kind of description of it.
Which makes me think about the potency of the time following the death moment for the family. And this came up in a side conversation, how it sets grief up very differently. So some of the reverence you may be displaying the body that is now empty in some way really is for the family or other onlookers. And for yourself as a practitioner to beat back cynicism. Like, oh, that's over, on to the next guy, whatever, something like that. There's a reverence that needs to kind of hang over and have its own life, its own decay. But to your point about organ donation, it's hard, gosh, I don't know. I mean, having lost body parts, I can say too, one of my great regrets, this may be dramatically off topic.
I think I know what you're going to say. I want to guess. Is it that you don't actually have your left hand?
Yeah.
It was just medical waste.
Yeah. So this is like looking for the silver linings.
Like what, when I had my wisdom teeth out, they gave them to me in a bag. So so your idea would be they'd give you'd have the option to take that home.
What a weird opportunity. I mean, I love finding the silver linings or the opportunities in loss. And I mean, can you imagine having your own skeleton, my own left hand, as a paperweight or something on my desk? I don't mean this in a creepy way. I'm just thinking it would have been fascinating.
As long as it was your own. You wouldn't want somebody else's.
Yeah, and I would want it cleaned up, et cetera. I mean, but that felt like a real beautiful opportunity, but more from a fascination. And then seeing my body as an object is actually its own sake, a little bit therapeutic for me. That reminded me that I'm not just my body. So I know we're kind of ping-ponging around here on that, and but I guess this could be a good conversation topic. So if anyone else has a comment about this, please chime in.
Do I have to offer a comment on that?
No.
That was great. But I do actually want to shift it a little bit because I work with the palliative care team of volunteers in the home, and back to, we're always trying to make the distinction between we are palliative care, we're not hospice. So what I loved about this presentation was how to bring aesthetic into that arc of palliative care while people are living. And there is the talk about, you know, how do you want to die, and, you know, this may end, you may end up on hospice before you're even there. So how to keep the enlivening. And I love the distinction between discernment and judgment. And then the picture you had even before the comic book of, I think it was Babe Ruth. You said it could be sports. And I thought of two things. The first one was when Michael Jordan played basketball, won 3 championships, went to play baseball, and then he came back. And I remember distinctly being, this was in the 90s, and I was doing AIDS work then, and being in a support group of caregivers. And people were like, I can't believe the media frenzy. This is so ridiculous. We already know he can play basketball. Here he is. And I remember being infused with this incredible sense, this guy is the best at what he does in the entire world. If I have the chance to watch that again, you bet I'm going to watch it. And I really felt it at a level of, I really felt it. It was a visceral feeling. Oh my God, I get to watch him play basketball again on TV. And then I thought of a client that I helped take care of for a couple of years, and he had a supernumerary Parkinson's, which is different. I'm not a medical person, but those of you who do know, anyway, he wasn't speaking any longer, and he needed somebody to help him walking, but his mind was completely there. And I learned, and so I think this was 2 years ago, when the last time the Giants won, and he was a baseball fan. And somehow I discerned that he was a baseball fan, and I went over one day, and we figured out how to turn on his TV. He and his wife never watched TV, but we figured out how, you know, to get the box, and we watched the game. And he enjoyed it, and I could tell he enjoyed it, and I knew they were not looking at the TV section. They never watched TV, and I have always felt that one of the most productive things I did as a palliative care volunteer was call the wife the next day and say, listen, I want to let you know the Giants are playing tomorrow night, and this is what channel they're on. And if you're able to bring Jack in and sit, you can watch that game. And she was like, oh my, that never would have occurred to me. Thank you. She didn't even know, you know, that the World Series was happening because she was so completely overwhelmed. So it also accomplished something that they could do together. They couldn't do that much together anymore because he didn't speak. And so I just want to thank you for bringing this, and I want to remind us that there's all kinds of what Diane Meyer said, all the little ways we can make a difference.
Right, you don't have to wheel the gurney into the Metropolitan Museum, right? I mean, it could be something like a baseball game on television, or comic strips you read, comic books you read as a kid, or something like that. And, you know, what Dewey said, it was anything that intensifies the sense of immediate living.
And I will just add to that, one of the reasons I love working in palliative care, and I really do end up, a lot of my work time is at end of life, when there's a big excuse for a lot of rules to go out the window, and you can really reprioritize. So things which may be subtle or fanciful or whatever can be upticked, upregulated. You can really reorder your sense of proportionality, which is lovely. And to Sharon's point about this being a creative act, a creative moment. Sure.
BJ, I'd just like to comment, respond to something you were just saying about the loss of your arm. And I think I would want the right to be able to bury it, or you know, have some form of ceremony to celebrate what it was to me.
Yeah.
Have there been any changes, or is it still just medical waste? You know,
I think it's medical. I don't think I haven't looked, but I don't even know that they gave me. I know they didn't give me an option. Even if I had requested it, I don't think they would have.
Yeah, whole new concept. And I also would just add that what I wrote down that you said that I'll take away, one of the things is that there's a reverence at the time of death that needs time for its own decay. That's really powerful for me. I sit vigil with people who are dying, and it's such a sacred time, and I just love putting some new words to what I feel when a death occurs. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are a couple more questions. We've actually got some exercises planned, but we'll
But
keep
yeah,
this
a couple more
going.
questions. Yeah, please.
This is going great. Is there a question here?
There's a question here.
Yeah, well, I'm really curious because we're spending a lot of time talking about, how beautiful it is and how we can make it nice for people who are dying and what we can do to, a lot of times dying is not nice, no matter what we do. And making it nice is actually not what's being invited. What's being invited is presence and that real sense of the sublime of when beauty and terror sort of implode on each other. And I think it's really important that we think about this, we talk about this, we feel it, because I think that's one of the things that's so hard to digest and manifests in me and other caregivers as sort of the shadow side where we are unkind to one another, where we are not there for our families because our work is so important, right?
I would just like to compliment the speaker on her correct use of the term sublime.
And really, amen on that. I mean, I have a reflex to take things to beauty, which is why it's so important to ground us in sort of.
I always want to.
Yeah, I do.
Why are we showing this picture here?
Right.
We certainly
is that
did not.
beautiful or is that horrifying? Right. I mean, and
Not my taste.
well, but to your point, which is such an important part of the question offline earlier was about the distinction between Kant and Dewey, and why Dewey is so important is it brings us back to something less rarefied. It's a sensation. It's not, positive, negative doesn't really enter into it. And sometimes I've tried to put this into my practice in my own life around when I'm having a pain moment. I try to think about, I'm so glad I can feel anything. And that gets me a little far. I mean, I don't want to overstate it, but there's something in me, I'm just, never mind what it is I'm feeling, I'm just glad to feel anything. There's something in that. But your point's really well taken, and those of us in the hospice world especially, I mean, this happens at Zen Hospice Project all the time, of the projection. Oh, it's going to be fun, it's just so beautiful. It's, not necessarily, and people, what they really need is that space, that protected space for it to be what it needs to be. And offering raw material for people to make meaning from in their own way is the best we can do. I don't want to over-engineer that.
I had shared before that my sister had died of pancreatic cancer about over 3 months ago. And her husband is left. He's 82. He lives on Cape Cod, close to where I live. He has got Alzheimer's. He's pretty stable. But it's so interesting watching everybody run around figuring out what they can do to help him, what they can do to make it better. When he likes to sit in his room with his cat in his lap, he's a brilliant man. He had an extraordinary career, but he's changed now. He's very content sitting at home. And he sits there and he watches his shows. And I'll just tell you the one story that he also likes to go out to dinner on Friday night. So he said to me, Lydia, would you like to go out to dinner on Friday night? I said, certainly. Where would you like to go? And he said, Criminal Minds. So these are the things that live in him, and there's no way that I would want to change that, nor would I want to look for something else. So I can participate in his end of life in this palliative way, just going along with whatever he wants and not trying to make it better for him. So thank you for making that right for me, for making me see it clearly, and for my being able to contribute in some way by just being there. So thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Amy.
I once heard Houston Smith speak, and he said, death is like staring at a sunset and then becoming that sunset. So it sets up in my mind a response to what you're presenting in terms of that external aesthetic, then going very much into an internal aesthetic that is very mysterious and probably so deep that those observing the death can't comprehend it. You know how people dip into dreams and then come back up out of it. So I don't have a question. I was just going to say that.
Thank you. Do you want to mention Kant and beauty being in you, not the object?
Yeah, in a longer version of this presentation, I would have mentioned how, or actually in something that we did actually write up, it says that I mentioned the first page. It's page 1, section 1, chapter 1, paragraph 1. It's like number 1 of everything in Kant's third critique. And I say Kant opens the third critique in a very surprising way, because he says that we cannot tell if an object is beautiful by looking at the object. And what he means by that is that we must look within ourselves. We have to see what effect the object has on us. So the location really of the aesthetic event is in us, it's not in the object.
You know, it brings to mind one other thing that in our sort of research, I think we're going to start seeing this word aesthetic more often. And there's a field burgeoning of neuroaesthetics, which is a sort of applying neuroimaging to the idea of aesthetics. And one thing that's come up is, you know, beauty is there's this sense, there's an objective sense. I think we all agree that this is a beautiful place, you know, that in studying art history, there's a sense that beauty is this thing that you have to, that everyone can agree upon, if they're really smart enough or in tune enough. It turns out, at least in the neuroaesthetic research to date, that there is no beauty center in the brain. So that our aesthetic sensibilities are on a spectrum from repulsion to attraction. And but the ugly stuff doesn't get a different part of the brain from the pretty stuff. You know, they're all in the mix.
That was the assumption in Enlightenment aesthetics, that there was a unique mode of experience, not necessarily associated with a particular part of the brain, but that was separate from all other modes of experience. And very recently, the field of neuroaesthetics has put that to the test, actually referencing Kant and other German philosophy of the 18th century. And what they found is that there is not a place of the brain that lights up when we're seeing something beautiful. It is on a continuum from revulsion to ecstasy, they say. And it's all located in the same place. So really the aesthetic covers all of it. You know, here's, again, I'm gonna mention Francis Bacon on the screen there. Anything from, in that wide spectrum falls under the heading, would fall under the heading of aesthetic, which is not specifically beautiful. That's why I was trying to make that point about separating, distancing beauty from the aesthetic. Not that it's not a part of it, but it is not synonymous with it. And it wasn't from the beginning, which I found very interesting, just historically speaking, and that it's becoming, we're kind of returning to that original point, but we're doing it through neuroscience.
I mean, this gives us also a potential mechanism for things like fetish. You know, people who are attracted to things that should be, you know, somehow verboten. So this is, you know, this is just starting to size up. Sorry. Are we pointing at different people? Sorry.
All right, we won't try to pick questions.
When you put up on the PowerPoint, I think it was enlivenment was the one that you responded to the most. For me, it's quickening. Having had the sensation of quickening when one is just feeling the baby when you're about to, you know, it basically, it's early in the pregnancy, but it just exemplifies for me sort of the contrast and the foil and the, you know, death and birth, and one becomes aware and how that for some mother that could be wonderful. And for another mother, that could be the most terrifying, horrible feeling in the world. But that it's, anyway, it just, when that word was up there, I thought, oh God, yes.
Well, perhaps we're lucky to read Kant in English, where, you know, in German, you're stuck with that one word. When you're translating that into another language, there are options. And there are many translations of Kant. I referred to just about all the English translations and compared them with the original German. You saw the original German page there. So it's an interesting way to study philosophy. You know, if we're reading Dewey wrote it in English, so the text is never going to change. The words will always be the same. But when you read another philosopher in translation, there are multiple translations. Why would new translations have to come out? Because ideas change, words change. Quickening, again, I said it had an old-fashioned charm. It's not a word that's used, but it's still out there in the literature, and someone like you could respond to it.
Totally identified.
Philip K. Dick, one of my favorite sci-fi writers, wrote this essay towards the end of his life about how he wanted to be on hallucinogens at the end of his life. And he wrote about how it was all about aesthetics. He wanted to have a heightened alertness and a heightened sense of colors and a heightened everything kind of in his final moments. And I thought, how beautiful, and that it just, what you were talking about really reminded me of that. And I can't imagine as MDs we'll be giving LSD to patients anytime soon, but I mean, has that kind of come into play ever kind of philosophically, or are we moving towards a point where we can kind of experiment with different ways of dying, like chemically?
Well, that's a really interesting point. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. We're starting to see sort of a loosening around, marijuana. We're starting to see serious studies on MDMA and psilocybin. So, who knows? I'd be very interested in seeing, not in just a sort of a, subversive or even recreational way, but there's something about bringing the sort of material world down into just that, raw material, and playing with our senses, and the subjectivity of the truth that they impart. That's really deep stuff to me. Now, there's a lot, I'm sure, to navigate besides sort of medical and legal issues. So I don't know that we're there. I'm sure we're not there ethically. But I can just say, my personal interest in having and working at a residential and a place-based hospice where people come and stay, you have an environment you can condition, is again for some of the rules that sort of govern our daily lives to get to go out the window. And for life to be what it needs to be, not based on these external prompts. So I don't plan on doing any wild experiments in our facility, but it will be very fun to be on that frontier. So all I can say is I endorse the impulse. I don't know when we'll get there, though, in some ethical, medical, legal way.
Just following up on what you just said, being that you're at the Zen hospice, what about meditative and contemplative work and co-meditation at the end of life and breathing someone through? Mm-hmm. Do you experience it? Is it something that's asked for?
It is, to some degree, yeah. I mean, so we are very fortunate at Zen Hospice Project. It's been around a while, and people are attracted. People come there. We have a very robust volunteer program. Probably I think we have about 110 active volunteers. Most of whom are doing a weekly practice on a weekly basis for 4 or 5 years on average. And I will say that a lot of what their work is as a spiritual practice it's cultivating, practicing their sense of presence, their ability to sit with suffering and to bear witness. So that can happen sort of covertly, but often enough, residents and their families may ask to meditate together, or the volunteer may offer it. So one way or another, it's happening a lot in our house, and in large part thanks to our volunteer crew. I will say it's a little different at we have nurses around the clock too, and they're busy doing other things. But we're trying to blur those lines. It's not just the volunteers over here and the professional caregivers over here, but trying to integrate all of these things. So a lot of our nurses go through our volunteer training, which is very contemplative in nature. Most of us on staff have gone through that training as well. So yes, in answer to your question.
How do you work with the different spiritual aesthetics that come along, like the spiritual iconography? I mean, do you try and integrate yourself into their background or introduce some Zen concepts? Or, I mean, it kind of comes in a package sometimes. So how do you unpack that?
Well, if they're with us long enough, they really, like I was saying earlier, they really move in and bring things with them and teach us all sorts of stuff about their interests or about their faith tradition or whatever it may be. We have a woman who's with us now who is an artist, and our house is now totally populated with her artwork, which is stunning, really, and it's of a spiritual bent itself. And so it's not of a tradition per se, but it's certainly deeply personal to her, and we are experiencing it with her. And it's been a very interesting source of meaning. Our interest in her art has been a profound source of meaning for her. She's lived an alienated life much of her life. So it's certainly invited. Again, the time and space issues are tough. It's a tight little Victorian. People aren't with us for very long, especially in a conscious state.
But those are the only limitations, not the interest per se. I will say that one of my favorite things about having a Zen origin is the Zen aesthetic. That, you know, it can be very spare. And so whatever is present is of deep importance or meaning. And again, you set up this nice foil.
That's kind of like what Rita was talking about.
Yeah.
Right, you kind of strip
There's
it down, and
starkness.
the Zen aesthetic is almost defined by an absence rather than a presence.
Yeah, which I personally love. So should we, oh, Mary, yeah.
I'm just curious, what happened along the way? And I'm actually specifically thinking about nursing homes, where the aesthetic is so depressing. And it's, I mean, often so depressing. And there's specific choices with aesthetics in those environments that are, they're common across the country. You know, certain color palettes and certain you know, locations for various things. It's almost like a formula. But where along the way did the aesthetic value fall off, or where did it not continue its integration within the dying process and end of life? Like, what happened?
I don't know. I mean, we can conjecture, but
well, my guess is that, you know, even if it seems kind of grim and dreary and whatever to us, it's probably still considered an upgrade from the acute care hospital, right? It's more like a home or more residential or something like that. It's
maybe.
maybe.
Yeah.
But it's probably intended to, or, you know, if you think of the age of some of these facilities, you're, you know, looking at a facility that's 30, 40, 50 years old. Well, at that time, think of the hospital aesthetic at that time. It was a cinder block box with white walls and open wards. And so if you had just a shared, just a double room that maybe had some wood paneling or something, and the curtain was blue instead of white, you know, maybe that was considered an aesthetic upgrade to what would have been available in the open ward of a hospispecialty. That's just my guess.
And I would say too, Mary, that I think it probably follows the arc of science dominating medicine. So if we go back again to Florence Nightingale, I mean, she talked explicitly about form, light, and color. I mean, she talks like an art historian or an art theorist as a nurse. So somewhere along the way, we got seduced, and those things got marginalized. It's become as seemingly less important, or fancies. That was her word for it. They're not fancies. They're necessities, is what we're trying to suggest, and Dewey suggests. So I think this is a time, you know, just look at the interest in the subject among us and how art's been woven through the whole time here. There seems to be a reawakening. Art therapy, pet therapy, these things are actually happening. So they're still sort of in formation, they're sort of appliqué, you know, a totally
they're still
integrated,
considered extras, right? Like aromatherapy, art therapy, touch therapy.
Yeah.
These are
They're not fully integrated, I wouldn't say.
They're
But
so-called complementary. They're supposed to complement the real therapy.
Or even worse, alternative.
Alternative.
So that's there's some sense that's changing. But I would guess that followed the arc of the sort of demeaning the aesthetic as somehow inessential that went with science. And I think the nursing home, I think there is something for us. Some of you guys, have you heard of the greenhouse model in the nursing? So there is a counterpoint. If you guys are interested, I would look up the greenhouse model of nursing homes. I can't remember the man's name, but there's a person who sort of, what is Bill Thomas. The Eden Alternative, Bill Thomas, the Greenhouse Project. Look this stuff up. There's one in California I visited in Claremont, and it's beautiful. It's demonstrably different. And most of his work, their work, was around navigating the regulatory burden that ends up dictating what the environment looks like, which is sort of well-intended to protect the safety of the residents, but in application, it's just sort of a horror show. So there's some room for optimism, and maybe we're waking up. We do. Yeah, a lot of folks volunteer their time. So Reiki, you got it, massage, touch therapy. So, we have a lot of musicians who come and play in the house. Yes, absolutely.
facility, and we treat the parents right now. We're just starting now to get in there and start treating the children. So I was just curious what you're doing out on your coast there.
Yeah, well, we still have a long way to go. I mean, ideally, it'd be fun to. I'm going to pull up by Bach.
Oh, yeah.
Zen Hospice, we're proud of it. It's a beautiful, it's an old Victorian. It's gorgeous. And there's a lot to be said for it. But we're also very aware that it would be fun to build from scratch. And we'll show you some pictures. For some reason, the pediatric world has all the fun. All the imagination and flair is reserved for the kids. So some of the best examples of de novo construction that would be considered deeply aesthetically provocative are built for children for some reason. So why we adults don't have much of the fun unless we get to work there. So this is a place, why don't you set us up?
Yeah, this is in Kuwait. This is Bible Children's Hospice, which was opened in 2012. And I mean, it's a stunning looking facility here, as you can see from the pictures. But even more interesting is that this was the final project of a 22-year-old female architecture student in Kuwait. And she said that when she was interviewed about the project, she said that she wanted to design a place where children would be happy to go. And that's why it looks like this. That's why it has all these bold colors, these geometric forms, these little hiding places. Look, this is one of my favorite pictures, the little kid's door into the cafe. These are some of the interiors. Up on the top is, you see the 2 beds there. That's the mother-child suite. And then this is a family suite down on the bottom. They also have these freestanding, they call them chalets, these colorful chalets that look out toward the Persian Gulf. It's got its own wheelchair-accessible Ferris wheel and amusement park. And this is the view from the top of the magic carpet ramp, looking out. This is a flamingo, migratory flamingo feeding ground or something like that. So, but this is a facility for children. Adults can't get in as patients.
Maybe you need to build one out by you.
We'd love to. I mean, and part of sort of helping society, helping each other turn our attention to this big subject, again, the aesthetic dimension can really help us do that, whether it's a bell or a building. Can you imagine driving by a hospice and say, God, I'd love to go in there. I'd love to, So
first would be like a mystery, just like I always wondered what that building was, and then you find out what it is.
So the hardscape, the material of a community is so potent, so profound, and it really dictates so much of the charm of a town or a city or any community. So we'd love to take advantage of that.
We've only got about 15 minutes left, so I think I think we should take a look at Henry.
Okay. Okay, let's do
We've got a video clip for you.
I have one more question.
Time flies.
While I'm getting this set up, yeah let's do the question.
How much then are you addressing the aesthetic of the abstract rather than of form? And the first speaker was one or two into this questioning period asked about the suffering and not the ugliness, but the non-beauty. Mm-hmm. For me, I think I'm more towards the abstract end of the spectrum in my work that I do with people, and I would just say that if someone died in a palace in misery, then there wasn't the aesthetic. And I've had people die on their porch because they didn't want anybody to come in their home, but feeling the most like embodiment of the aesthetic that he wanted. And I feel like we as practitioners are the aesthetic, the living, breathing aesthetic that we interact with the patient and the family and the environment. And like this woman up front said, breathe them to the next place. It's an organic process, and I get the form, and I get that, as a social worker, I'm always looking for things that enhance their environment, but I really think it's more this organic abstraction. We are pieces of art standing in their presence, a field of awareness.
I so agree with you. I mean, I think this is why this subject deserves, a lot of discussion and fleshing out and attention, and why part of the discipline for us, and we just rewrote our mission statement, or recently rewrote our mission statement in Zen Hospice Project, around cultivating space. And that's come up a few times over the course of this last 3 days. Not cultivating beauty. We're cultivating a space to allow, again, this sort of meta level, kind of, the discipline is staying at the meta level and not overly projecting, setting up space for things to happen that others can dictate, that we don't foist on people. And you know, a lot of people want to go down swinging. A lot of people find meaning in ugliness. And so, I mean, so it's way more varied than we can do justice in an hour conversation. But all I can say is I'm with you, and this is why it's not just as easy as making a pretty building. That could actually I would make me feel worse, you know, if it was just. But there is also, I think what I think I'm hearing your point too is that we are therapeutic agents ourselves, our bodies, our being, you know, as caregivers. And that sets up this dynamic, and all sorts of things are happening in that, which is why it would be putting all your resources in building a gorgeous facility and not working on the development of the staff and volunteers and the board and everyone involved would be so misplaced. You imagine a ton of grumpy people working in a beautiful place. So we have to treat ourselves, our bodies, with agency as well.
All right, so we'll have to continue the conversation. You know, we're going to be around. We'll continue it elsewhere. But we have this video clip we want to share with you. Some of you may have seen it, but we want everyone to have a look at it.
Hi, Papa. Hi, Papa.
Huh?
How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm fine. Wait.
Who am I?
I don't know. Wait a minute. I don't know.
Okay, it's Cherry.
How long has he been in the nursing home? Approximately 10 years. He was having seizures, and my mother couldn't handle him at home. Of course, it affected me greatly because he was always, you know, fun-loving, singing, you know, every occasion he would come out with a song, no matter where he was. I remember as a child, he used to walk us down the street, me and my brother, and he would stop and do Singing in the Rain. He would have us jumping and swinging around poles. He was, you know, he was good. He was always into music, you know, always loved singing, dancing.
His name is Henry Dreyer.
Uh-huh.
And I'm looking more or less for religious music for him.
Okay.
Because he enjoys music and he always quotes in the Bible. So I'd rather have that for him.
We first see Henry inert, maybe depressed, unresponsive, and almost unalive.
Henry.
Yeah?
Henry.
Yes, sir.
I found your music. You want your music now?
Up to you.
Okay. Let's try your music, okay? And then you tell me if it's too loud or not.
Then he is given an iPod containing, we know, his favorite music. And immediately he lights up. His face assumes expression, his eyes open wide. He starts to sing and to rock and to move his arms, and he's being animated by the music.
And he used to always sit on the unit with his head like this. He didn't really talk to much people. And then when I introduced the music to him, this is his reaction ever since.
The philosopher Kant once called music the quickening art, and Henry is being quickened, he's being brought to life. Yeah.
I'm going to take the music for 1 second, okay? Just to ask you a few questions. Okay? I'm going to give it back to you.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
The effect of this doesn't stop, because when the headphones are taken off, Henry, normally mute and virtually unable to answer the simplest yes or no questions, is quite voluble.
Henry.
Yeah?
Do you like the iPod? Do you like the music you're hearing?
Yes.
Tell me about your music.
Well, I don't have one, I mean.
Do you like music?
Yeah, I'm crazy about music. You play beautiful music, beautiful sound. Beautiful.
Did you play music when you were, did you like music when you were young?
Yes, I went to big dances and things.
What was your favorite music when you were young?
I guess, Cab Calloway was my #1 band guy. I liked. The holy, the holly, the hilly, the holy, the milly, the holly, the ah.
Yeah, what's your favorite Cab Calloway song?
Oh, I'll be home there for Christmas. Oh, you can count and plan on me with plenty of snow, mistletoe, present, wrap around your tree. Ow!
So in some sense, Henry is restored to himself. He has remembered who he is, and he's reacquired his identity for a while through the power of music.
Music can be used for patients, patients like Henry, for schizophrenic patients. They have a lot of different people, and they've been distributing music players to them, and a lot of their experiences are recorded in this film. I think it's finally found release. That clip had been circulating for a long time, and I think it just came out earlier this year. That could be right. The producer or the director, I can't remember. Don't remember.
Or 5 to your 6 or your 7 or your 8, you can take your old and donate it to this.
Right, they have a collection.
They'll wipe it, and then hospice volunteers or
It's
whomever.
done through. I think the foundation is called Alive Inside, like the film.
So it's great.
We don't have a lot of time. We had. We've got 5 minutes. One of our exercises was going to be, we were going to ask people to share what the things that they do personally that operate at an aesthetic level. What do like I was talking earlier about, what do you do that's in and for itself? What do you do that's not a means to some other end, where your experience is really captured, it begins and ends in a single, it can be an event, it can be an object, it can be some little practice that you have. I guess we'll just open it up to, one thing, you mentioned that the snowball, I mean, there was just an aesthetic moment that you had receiving the snowball. Just before our talk today, we did a little, it wasn't a formal tea ceremony, but tea is something that's very important to both of us, so we drank some special tea before we came out, just get us juiced up. And I'm just wondering, what are experiences that people would like to share here? How does the aesthetic form part of your individual day?
And it can be anything.
This morning, just going out on the ridge, and if anybody has been out there, the way the clouds were, they were talking to each other. They were going towards and apart from one another, and so nature for me is my go-to aesthetic that gives me a sense of gratitude and fullness, joy.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. I make it a point to go out every single day to take a walk somewhere.
I live in downtown Toronto. However, I go outside and I pick raspberries out of my backyard. And there's something about eating food that I've grown. I'm never going to grow enough to sustain myself, but it's not really about the sustenance, it's about the aesthetic.
It's a different sustenance, yeah.
In the hospice unit, eye contact.
Important, yeah. Just a connection in a moment like that.
I like to dance in the kitchen spontaneously.
All right.
It's sort of patient related. I work at a very busy Mount Sinai Medical Center in Manhattan on a 13-bed palliative care unit overlooking Central Park on Fifth Avenue. And recently a little lady came to the unit and said to me, "I finally have a Fifth Avenue address."
Awesome. Great.
There's a linden tree in the parking, right next to the parking lot I park at before I go in the hospital every day. And on one side, it's very tall, very big tree, very good, big presence. And on one side, it looks perfect. And on the other side, you see all these scars and broken branches. And so I look at that, if I can, I touch it on my way in and my way out. And a lot of days, I feel like that's what actually keeps me sane.
It just allows you to step outside of that endless chain of means and ends, right, where your experience stops for its own sake. I noticed before I came out here, I live in Seattle, the rainy season has started, and I just happened to glance, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this intense patch of green, and I stopped, and I looked, and it's this moss has just come to life with the rain. It's very dry in Seattle. I mean, don't believe what people tell you. It never rains. My lawn turns brown. This moss, didn't even notice it, but the rain brought it back to life. It was like almost as if it was lit up from inside. So for me, that was having just a little, what Dewey would call an experience, just to sit and look for a few seconds at a piece of moss brought to life by the rain. Is there another? Is the mic? Where's the mic? Behind the board there.
I was trying to narrow it down a little bit. I think there's so many things I do. But sometimes when I go home, especially after I've been away for a while, I'll just play an open G chord on one of my guitars. And it's not when I'm sitting down actually where I'm going to play for a while. I'll just play an open G chord and maybe just slide to that B flat. And it just pulls at me in a way. So satisfying and full. It's like everything's right there. So.
We have one over here.
See, no names. We're not putting anyone on the spot here. Just whoever wants to share.
I love LED lights, the little mini lights, and I will wrap them on branches or whatever. And if I just turn those on, plug those in, no matter what I'm doing, it's just more special. It's more important. Even when I'm meditating, I'll have it on, and even though I have my eyes closed, I know that light's there. It's just changes my whole being.
This isn't something, but it's of the philosophy nature, and this is just reminding me a lot of Martin Buber and really appreciating something for its essence and what it is, or doing something just because. It's not an I-it, but it's an I-thou, and just relating and being humans and creatures in the world. It's important.
John Dewey talks a lot about just relating us back to our animal self, this is not just a human, I mean, perhaps animals navigate the aesthetic plane even more than we do. Other animals, I should say.
I live in Brooklyn, and one of my favorite things to do is to go horseback riding in Queens. And the Forest Hill Park, it's 536 acres. And then come back to the stable and groom the horses and talk to them. And I find it very rewarding. They're very smart.
Great. Thank you, Hester. Who else has to share? There's a hand back there. Oh, Diane. Can't wait to hear this.
Well, we already heard about Diane and the leaves. I mean, what could be next?
More in her.
A few months ago, it was a particularly windy day in San Francisco, or windy night. And the next morning, my husband and I got up together and we were going out the door to work. And there on the doorstep, there was a piece of paper that had landed kind of perfectly. And my husband picked it up, and there, written in very clear crayon writing, was, "Remember to be happy." So I took it and put it under a rock by my front step, and every day I say out loud, "Remember to be happy."
That's beautiful.
I guess we haven't really prepared a closing message, have we?
Well, I mean, maybe there is no need to close it.
Because it's still open, right?
It's still open. This is obviously information for all of us. I mean, hopefully we sort of clarified some terminology together and maybe encouraged a reprioritization of what's considered important.
And then we've shown how small it can be. It's scalable, right? You've got $100 million, build, a hospice with its own amusement park. If you got $0, then just look out the window, and maybe there's some moss out there.
Clean the window.
Okay.
So it looks like it's time, guys. But anyway, thank you very, very much for sharing. Yeah, I appreciate it.